Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast. This is your bonus episode for March, episode 57 overall. Welcome back. Yes, 2 episodes in the week. We were just talking a few days ago. Now we're back. Coming ahead, we've got a very, very special guest. Christina is our author for this week for the special episode. Can't wait to get you over to that. But first, as I said, this is the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Follow along for any kind of posts or tweets or anything that we have in there. You can reach out and contact us through those methods. And you can also reach out to us through samplechapterpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any comments, if you want to reach out to me as an author, or if you have an author recommendation and you want to tell me about somebody that you would like me to interview. As we did last month, I'm just going to do a quick little thank you for our sponsor and friends. If you are looking for a self-storage solution in the Warrensburg area, make sure you go to U-Sto-R-All.net and check them out. You give them a call. They'll be happy to help you out. Again, that website is the letter U, STORALL.net. Also, our friends over at Pop Goes the Culture Network, they have a whole slew of shows, wonderful things to listen to. There's lots and lots of different shows, whether it's the flagship Pop Goes the Culture podcast or the Alamo Drafthouse weekly movie show. The list goes on and on. I know there's a lot more, and I probably ought to get a list of those one of these days, but head on over to Pop Goes the Culture Network and check that out. I will have links for each of these in the show notes, so don't forget to look them up. And of course, I also want to, again, make sure and remind you about the 51st University of Central Missouri Children's Literature Festival coming March 17th through the 19th. More than 30 authors are going to be in attendance. It's going to be a really, really cool thing. Like I said, it's a 3-day event, so make sure you get on over here. Warrensburg, Missouri is just right outside of Kansas City. So it's, if you're anywhere in the area, come on in and check it out, and you're going to have fun. Look it up online at clf.ucmo.edu or click the link in the show notes. And we'll have more for that next week with our next episode. Our bonus episode, our guest for this bonus episode is Christina. He is an author, podcaster, musician, publisher, historian, and radio host. Woo, man, that's a lot to that is a lot to handle. And he is, I say in the interview, I believe he is my first Western author. Hey, I'm just excited because these are some really cool stories. He's got his main series that's been going on for a long time called The Hunter. Is a series of books been going on. He's got more than 10 books in this series with his main character Tiger Richmond, which ironically it's the second time this week we've got a main character who is a senior. Now that's not the story that Jim reads from today, but I found that interesting going back and editing the show and getting it ready that just the other day our main character was an older person. Well, anyway, so yeah, you want to check out the Hunter series by Christina. Jim and I talk, he talks about his Hunter character and how this was something that had been stuck in his mind for many, many years before he finally got to writing. He has an amazing solution for writer's block that you don't want to miss out if you're an author. And, and before he goes into his reading, I did a little reminiscing about the movie Silverado and thinking about his books and how that reminded me a little bit of it. In retrospect, now that I've gone back and I have been able to read a little bit in his books, and of course hearing this chapter today, which is, oh my gosh, it's breathtaking how action-packed it is. But it got me thinking, really, this reminds me of Lonesome Dove, which is definitely much more realistic than Silverado. Silverado will forever have a soft spot in my heart, but Lonesome Dove is something that I will watch that every year. I have for decades. I love this series, and I still tear up. Yeah, I mean, maybe I should say spoiler alert, but I mean, if you haven't seen Lonesome Dove by now, you got to check it out. So, so if you've seen Lonesome Dove, you know which of the several scenes that are going to cause you to tear up. But there's that one about 2/3 of the way through the show where, oh my gosh. Anyway, I am going off the rails here. I had a wonderful time speaking with Jim. You want to make sure you get over, follow the links in the show notes for his radio talk show. Check out his interviews. He does amazing author interviews, and I've listened to several of them now, and the guy is really talented. He really knows his stuff, and he really puts in a lot of time with the authors that he brings onto his show. So I highly recommend you check it out, and make sure you click on that link in the show notes. I'm going to get us on over so that you can hear about Jim Christina and his latest book, Jefferson's Chance, coming up next. Well, howdy, fans! Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast. I'm really excited this week. With me is a new friend of mine, Jim Christina, and I'm really excited because this is, I think, my first Western writer. So, thus the cheesy howdy I said there at the beginning. I'm not very good at that, but Jim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Jason?
I'm probably shouldn't be drinking.
Hey, I got no problem with it.
Well, go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm retired actually. I'm from an Air Force family and lived around the world, but mostly from Del Mar, California. I've been writing Western novels since 2008. And I just had this character that was rolling around in my brain for the longest time, and finally decided to put him down on paper, and that character's name is the Hunter. Actually, that's what people call him. His actual name is Taggart Richmond. And he's not a young guy. He's an old guy. He's a little beat up. He's like in his mid to late 50s, and he's a manhunter in Arizona in the 1880s.
That's exciting.
There, things just boomeranged. I mean, different characters added themselves. New books came around, and it's just, it's been a great process. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I mean, so Tiger, I mean, the Hunter here. This is really cool. So the idea for him is really what inspired your series, and
right.
And so once he came forward, did you have all these adventures planned for him, or did they just kind of pop up as you were going?
Well, it's like any writer, Jason. I mean, you plan to do something, but the character always kind of tends to take over and changes your plans.
Yes.
And you wind up going 180 degrees from where you wanted to go, and you wind up with a story that you had no idea you even had. So, the characters will dictate your story to you if you just let them. If you give them their head and let them go, they'll tell your story.
Yeah, that's great advice too for anybody, all you aspiring authors out there or newbie writers, myself included. And it's a great lesson to learn. Well, so far you got the Hunter series has been running about 12 to 13 books with another 3 to 4 standalones, and
right.
even with the standalones, you've got characters from the Hunter series, which is a great way to cross over and get people interested, going back and forth and check out. So now, when you're planning these out, do you plan them out, or do you just it sounds like you're just kind of rolling with it?
Well, I know the beginning and I know the end.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I kind of know what's going to go in the center and what order. But by the time the story gets flowing, I let the flow go. I don't try to stop and fight it, because that's when you're going to wind up getting blocked. And I just don't like that to happen. So, I mean, we call it writer's pause, but truly, if you let the story flow on its own, you very rarely ever run across that. So I'm a pantser. I don't do outlines. I know beginning and I know ending, and everything in between is always a surprise, even to me.
Well, and that's I've experienced that a little bit, especially through my second book right now that I'm working on. That is a really fun thing, and it's hard for people who don't write to understand that feeling, to all of a sudden jump back and go, "You got to be kidding me!"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and they're like, "What are you talking about? It's in your head." Yeah, but
But
the
where did it
characters
come
speak
from?
to us.
Exactly, exactly.
So now, and one of the things I really love about this, and admittedly, I have not been able to start reading The Hunter or the other ones, but I'm hoping that by the time this episode comes out, I will have. This is cool that he's not your typical young gun. He's the best at what he's doing. He's an older guy, and
Yeah.
he's seasoned, I guess would be the best way to put it.
No, he's old.
Yeah. But particularly in the Old West, you don't get that way without being good at what you're doing.
Exactly. Well, he's good at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
And he is older, and he's slowing down a little bit, but his knowledge is just invaluable.
Yep. Well, and you've got a real gritty realism to it. From everything I've read about from the reviews and listening to some audio, some people talking about your books, you have a real grittiness, and everybody just talks about the realism, from the bullets to the horses to the experiences. Now, where does that come from?
Well, I was a horseman for, oh golly, a lot of years. And I rode Western, and I rode Old West. So I had an Old West saddle, half seat, high back, a fork. I mean, it was just a saddle that just would have been used back in the Old West. And that was my basic everyday saddle. And when you know around horses and you know about horses, if you don't write them correctly, people who do know horses will catch you. So, I mean, you don't just gallop your horse across the prairie and jump off at night and go to sleep and leave the horse standing there.
Right.
In fact, you very rarely ever galloped anywhere. Most everybody walked, and they toted along a mule or a pack horse. And, it was just things that were just common sense back then. You got done before the day, you groomed your animal. He came first, he's the one that's going to get you where you're going.
Right. Yeah. Kind of like what we see in the movies so much, where the guy's riding his horse real hard all night long to get where they're going.
Right.
And then he just hitches the horse and let's go inside and get, do our standoff with the guy, the bad guy waiting for me. That horse is dead.
Exactly. And people don't get the fact that most horses can't gallop more than about a mile and a half without actually collapsing.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, you can lope a horse, which is a 3-hoof beat, and trot all day and all night. But if you try to gallop him, he's gonna drop dead because his heart explodes. And they'll do it for you. They won't stop.
Wow. That's really fascinating. And it's just one of those details that a lot of people don't know, just because of what we've seen in movies and such.
Right.
But those who do know are gonna be reading your book and nodding along with. Yep, that's right.
Yep. And almost, there's a few things that I put in there that are realistic, and realism is important to me. It's like when you tie your horse up outside of a saloon or a bar or a hotel, you always leave your halter on the horse, and you tie the horse to the hitch with the halter lead. You take the bridle off the horse, and either you hang it on your saddle horn, or most people just took it in with them because they didn't want to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So guys would walk in, go have a drink or whatever, and they'd have their bridle slung over their shoulder.
Wow. Okay.
And anything important that was on their horse, like their rifle or, that stuff that is hard to replace.
Yeah, I can imagine. I guess even in those times, that would just kind of run off.
Yeah.
I never even thought about that, but that's about right. Yeah. Well, now you've got a lot of your characters they're inspired by historical people and people that you know.
Yes.
Now, how do you get inside their heads?
Just years of knowing them, talking to them, know how they act and how they behave and how they react to certain instances and stuff that happens. It's just, it's observation.
Do you have a particular one that has really stuck with you, who's just like, yeah, I'm still here, you're going to keep writing me for a while?
Yeah, Steve Gazzetto is, he's my quintessential hunter cowboy. And he actually is a cowboy, and golly, back when I was first really getting used to being around horses, Steve was a great teacher. And we took day rides up into the mountains and into the deserts, and we went everywhere. And it's where I learned a lot about, taking care of the animal, and no matter what terrain you're in.
Okay.
So
now going back to when you started, when you first began writing in 2008, what was did you have a history with writing, or did you have any experience with this before?
Lyrics for songs.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, I was a musician for a number of years back in the mid to late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. All right. Well, now we're going to have to dive into that. Tell us some more about this.
Well, I had two bands. Number one was called Homegrown, and we played around Oregon, did the Oregon State Fair a couple times, and it was just myself and a guy named Alan Blakely, and we called it Homegrown because we actually built a 6-string banjo, and he built an actual 2-string bass that we used to use, hence the name Homegrown.
Yeah.
And then we wrote a lot of our own music, and then as bands go or groups go, you kind of wander off your own, doing your own thing, and I wound up hooking up with a guy named David Audie and Buck Buchanan up in Washington and Tacoma. And these guys were just terrific, and they were musicians to beat musicians. Mm-hmm. So we hooked up, and we started doing some music that I had written, and they really liked it. And we worked out 2- and 3-part harmonies and 2- and 3-part guitar parts, and the band became known as Sundown.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and we played up and down the West Coast into Canada, and we had a great time. And then, of course, again, they wanted to do country rock, and I didn't want to. So I went ahead and became a single for a number of years. And then I just kind of got out of it all the way around, because it's just, it takes a lot out of you. Oh,
sure.
Unless you've given up your day job and you're making tons of cash singing, it ain't worth it.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, now you've also gotten into, you host your own radio show, The Writer's Block, that's been going on for the last 4 years or 5 years now?
4 years. 4 years in April, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Now, how did this come about?
I don't know. I always thought that it would be a great thing to be able to interview writers, give them the entire program, instead of a 10-minute slot. They get the entire show, and let them tell us about their current work, and then give us ideas of their process and how they go about getting a story, and their dialogue, and editing and stuff. Things that new writers really like to hear about.
Yeah.
So that's how it came to be. And our first show was, I think, May 22nd or 21st of 2015. And
wow.
And it's we're going strong.
Well, yeah. I mean, that you've got to have something good going to be going this long. And this is, from what I can tell, this is a weekly show?
It's weekly. It's every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific.
My goodness. Wow.
In fact, we have had New York Times best-selling writers on our show, and they're clamoring to get on it, Jason.
I'm sure. I'm going to have to find somebody to throw my name in the hat.
Well, it takes an email to guestwb@yahoo.
Well, there you go. There you go, listeners. You've heard it here. So
yeah, we had a writer, John Sanford, who is a huge guy. He's written 37 prey novels. He writes about just Virgil Flowers. The guy is just a terrific writer, and he's been around a number of years. Mm-hmm. In fact, you can't go to an airport without seeing one of his books on the shelf.
Oh, wow.
And he was on our show, and he was absolutely a delight, and like most of the writers that come on our show. Mm-hmm. Oh, we ask him, because we ask everybody, have you ever had writer's block? And if you have, how did you get out of it? And his answer was, well, if I get stuck, I bring in a guy with a gun. So I thought, what a great title for a book. So if I get stuck, I bring in a guy with a gun. Insane musings from the Writer's Block radio show.
Oh my gosh. Well, I haven't had near the longevity that you've had, but it's been a fantastic trip so far, and it's hard to find. Yeah, I don't think there's a bad writer out there. Anybody who's taking the time to put a book out there, have they been through something, and they have something to offer.
Yes.
And it's great that you've got a show that's highlighting that, because it really means something for people to hear that, and especially to that writer to get to come on and talk about their craft and their books, and to have somebody interested. So that's really great that you've got this show, and it's been going on for so long.
Yeah, and actually this we had one show that was on a Tuesday night this year. It was a special. It was a showcase, two young women who are seniors in high school and started their own online high school magazine.
Wow.
And they were absolutely thrilled to be on the show, and their stuff is like super deluxe delicious. It's really good. So we were honored to have them with us. And then the 26th of this month, which is another special Tuesday night, I have Tom Lane coming on. He was the head detective for the O.J. Simpson investigation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he's got a couple books out there. So, and this is just going to be a discussion about his books. We're not going to get into anything else other than.
Yeah.
And he just lives about 3 miles from me, so it's easy to get him.
Well, go ahead and let us know again. When does this air?
It will be on live on February 26th at 7 p.m. Pacific.
Okay. And where do we find
this?
The
next day, it will be available under podcast, so you'll be able to pick it up.
Okay. And that is the Writer's Block. So.
That is correct. That is under LA Talk Radio /Writer's Block. I think a content Writer's Block. If you just go to the Writer's Block at LA Talk Radio, you'll find it.
There you go. Perfect. Awesome. Well, all right, so now your latest book, we'll get and circle back around here.
Okay.
Your latest book, Jefferson's Chance. Tell us a little bit about this.
Jefferson's Chance, one of my very favorite stories. It's a story. It starts out as a 10-year-old boy in Austin, Texas, on a ranch about 5 miles out of Austin. He's bitten by a rattlesnake, and the story opens with the doctor telling his mother that he has to take the leg. And his mother is telling the doctor, well, it's easy for you to say that, but it's my son. And we go through that whole thing, and they finally do take the leg. And Jefferson is given a solid wood prosthetic, which is what they pretty much had back then in 1863. And he always wanted to be a Texas Ranger. His father had died months before, and he had been a Texas Ranger during the Great Comanche Raid in 1840. And he wanted to be a Texas Ranger so bad. And the chapter 1 opens with him standing in the Ranger captain's office in Austin, Texas, and the captain telling him, no, you're crippled. You've only got one good leg. And he goes, well, I got a wooden leg. I mean, I can ride, I can do. And he goes, no, you can't. You cannot be a Ranger. And so he just tells him, look, you grow a new leg, Jefferson, and I'll swear you in. Well, it just goes from there. And he runs into an engineer from that had designed the Waco suspension bridge over the Brazos River in 1870.
Okay.
And it's a real thing, and you want to look it up. His name is Thomas Griffin. And he tells Jefferson, the guy's drinking slow gin fizzes. He tells Jefferson that I can design you a leg. And Jefferson is like intrigued now. And he says, yeah. He says, and it will work just like a normal leg. Okay. So they work out a deal where, Thomas Griffith designs him a leg, and his payment is that he gets to provide the patent.
Wow. Okay.
And he says, I don't build it. I'm not a builder. I'm a designer. You got to find someone to make it for you. So he gets the old blacksmith to build it for him. And bottom line is he gets to join the Rangers, and the leg works just like a normal leg. And there's a description of it in there. I'm not going to get into that now.
Yeah, well, and it looks like you've got a picture of that on the cover as well.
Picture of it, and that's somewhat what the leg would look like. Yeah,
that's really cool. Well, I can't wait to hear your reading of it, and then definitely I can't wait to dive into this later on, because I need some Western stories. I get plenty of fantasy and sci-fi and other stuff, and I need some Westerns in my life. I remember my next door neighbor and I, we in high school, we walked. We weren't driving yet. We walked to the movie theater about 5 miles away and saw Silverado when it was in theaters, and it was just like the highlight of our year.
Oh yeah, it's a great movie.
So, and I miss out on getting to see, you don't get to see good Westerns, and you don't get to a lot of great Western stories. So I'm looking forward to diving into some of these stories.
Well, Silverado, the opening sequence of Silverado is one of the best opening sequences in any movie I've ever seen.
I would agree.
And if you can't listen to it on surround sound, you were missing so much in that opening sequence.
The percussion of the guns in that movie are really something. It's
the crackle of the fire in the fireplace, and everything is so quiet.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the bullets start coming through the wall.
Yep. Oh man, and just the cast and everything. So
yep.
it sounds like almost as if some of these characters maybe just jumped off the screen and into your books from what I'm hearing.
Well, kinda. I mean, my books are a little more realistic than Silverado.
Well, that's all right. I'll take it though. So.
Okay.
Jim, thank you so much for coming on. Where can we find you online?
You can go to jimchristina.net is my website. You can go find me at blackdogpublishing.co, which will also take you to Tuscany Bay Books. My email address is jimchristina@yahoo.com. And my Facebook page is just Jim Christina.
All right. And I will make sure and put links to all this in the show notes. And Jim, it's been a pleasure. I can't wait to hear this story. And ladies and gentlemen, Jim Christina with Jefferson's Chance.
Okay, this is chapter 17. Burning the fog slowly from the ground, the incessant sun continued rising higher into the morning sky, and by the time the three men and their two charges had gone 4 to 5 miles, the continual beat of the sun was becoming almost intolerable, to the point they felt they need to stop and find shade somewhere to rest themselves and their animals, but more, to check the well-being of the two girls currently in their care. Caleb, that had been ranging far ahead to find shade and water, was eventually spotted in the distance, waving his hat in the air, signaling he had found something. Both Estevez and Jefferson spurred their mounts into a trot and headed towards Caleb, still sitting on his horse, but no longer waving. Reining in at the top of a small rise, Jefferson and Estevez saw what Caleb had been waving about. A shallow stream meandered in the bottom of a ravine with short, stocky scrub oaks lining the banks, a perfect spot to give their horses and themselves a rest. Jefferson steered his horse down the rocky embankment, paying careful attention to loose rocks and dirt that could have been the cause of a severe fall. Reaching bottom, Jefferson lifted the girl over his saddle horn and dropped her to the ground before dismounting, loosening his cinch and driving his picket pin into the ground, picketing both his horse and the mule. Looking around him as he pulled the saddles from his horse and spare mule, Jefferson grabbed a brush and started brushing his mount. "Any idea where them hostiles got off to?" he asked, keeping the eye on a young girl. "Say, what is your name anyhow?" asked Jefferson, squatting down eye level with the girl. "Rebecca," came the answer. "Rebecca Sandoval." "Well, Rebecca, how long you been here with them Comanche?" asked Caleb, moving towards the girl and Jefferson. "I don't know," Rebecca replied, starting to sob uncontrollably. "All I remember is they took me and Jasper, killed our folks, and run. The older one, I think they's calling him Mukwoo, done all the talking." Caleb stopped and stared at the girl for a moment, looking intensely at her. Caleb moved even closer and knelt down. "Mukwoo?" he asked. "Was that his name? Mukwoo?" "Maybe," said the girl. "Most of the time he was being thrown about, says I never really heard that much. But we didn't talk Comanche neither, so I don't know for sure." Caleb sat back on the ground, looking at Jefferson and then at Estevez. He pulled his hat and scratched his head and plopped his hat back on his head. "If it's Mukwoo, that sure answers a lot of questions," Caleb said finally. "Who's Mukwoo?" asked Jefferson. Estevez looked at Jefferson as he cradled up his daughter. "Some high pendejo Comanche patron. Come up after Quanah gave up. He's been running these prairies since the summer of '74, he said, stroking his daughter's hair. "Fact is, if it's him and his amigo Pecos, we got grandes problemas, amigos. Grandes problemas." Caleb looked at the two men, both holding young girls. "Shit, gonna be a long day," he thought. "A real long day." Pecos rolled in circles for almost an hour after the first attempt to take out the hairy mouths, his anger seething at the frustration building in his belly. He couldn't stand being beaten or even temporarily stopped by 3 hapless hairy mouths, much less being run off and losing their captives, even though he himself had killed the boy. Mukruru watched his friend until the anger rose in him, as well as he approached Pecos with care, knowing his friend could and had lashed out before. "My friend, all is not lost. They are but 3, and we are many," he finally said. Pecos swung around in his saddle, staring hard at his friend. "Did you not know the one hairy mouth?" he asked. "It was the Tejas Tanapu, the one they call Stringfeld, the one from the Long River, the one called Comanche Killer." "I saw," replied Mukwuru. "We cannot help which hairy mouse or Tejas Tanapu we fight. They just come, they go, they live, they die." Kicking his horse's flanks, Mukwuru turned and yelled at his friend as he rode to catch the rest of the band. "Come, my friend. Kanate knows where they have gone." Jefferson shifted uncomfortably on his right side. He was learning his leg was natural all the time except when he lay for protracted periods of time. Then it became a throbbing inconvenience to be dealt with as quickly as possible. Reaching down, pulling up his trouser leg, Jefferson undid his straps, loosened the leg on his stump, allowing the throbbing to subside a bit. "Hurt, Mr. Jefferson?" asked the girl, Rebecca. "Just gets to throbbing a bit when I ain't doing nothing but laying," replied Jefferson. "We'll tighten her up after a while in case we got to run." Estevez clung to his daughter while watching out across the prairie for the hostiles to appear, and when they finally did, all Caleb heard was a heavy sigh from his friend. "They have come," sighed Estevez. Caleb and Jefferson rolled to their carbines perched on the edge of the ravine, Jefferson reaching down to tighten the straps on his leg, making sure they were snug enough for him to be able to move without hindrance. Pushing Rebecca down further into the ravine, he looked at her and mouthed, "Stay down." Caleb watched the Comanches approach, at first a walk, then a trot, and finally into a gallop, their screaming permeating the early afternoon skies. Settling into a good position for fighting, Caleb took a bead on the lead warrior as they rushed forward, deliberate in their hunt for hairy mouth scalps. Jefferson took aim on one of the lead rushers, and when they got about 200 yards away, cocked the hammer on his carbine and squeezed the trigger, opening the fight. Jefferson's bullet slammed into the lead Comanche, pushing him forward, then knocking him from his horse, throwing him under the hooves of the other warriors, unhorsing 2 more in the crashing melee that followed. Caleb let go with rifle balls as well, targeting the warriors closest to him as he gauged distance and windage, firing into the crowd of onrushing warriors, screaming and whooping as they moved forward in a rushing mass. Each man was picking targets, unnerving the Comanches as they came. Noticing with each shot of the hairy mouse another warrior fell, the Tejanos had the advantage over the Comanche in that they were steady enough to take careful aim, while the onrushing Comanches were relying on indiscriminate firing of arrows and outdated carbines and rifles on a gallop, spoiling whatever aim they may have had. As the rush came closer, the 3 men on the ravine started taking stock of each hit they made and watching the antics of the warriors as they tried to encircle but were unable to because of the length of the ravine and the depth of the depression. Consequently, they were forced to remain in a face-on attack, relying on sheer numbers and fear to get them inside the fire of the Texans, were throwing at them in a fevered pace. Jefferson rolled to his side to reload his carbine when he spotted another arrow sticking from his right leg, this time above his stump in the fleshing part of his right thigh. So far, the pain was minimal and the blood loss insignificant, so he snapped off the arrow, threw it aside, and continued fighting after finishing reloading. Estevez seemed to be having the hardest time of it as the concentration of the attack was coming directly at his position, making it difficult for neither Caleb nor Jefferson to be able to move around to help take the slack in the firing. Adjusting to reload his rifle, Estevez felt the sting of a rifle ball enter his left shoulder and throw him back before recovering and moving back to the edge of the ravine. With his daughter down at his feet, Estevez fought like a demon to keep the charging Comanche warriors at bay, and for the most part was succeeding until the second rifle ball slammed into his upper right torso at his neckline, tearing through his collarbone and traveling downward, shattering his shoulder blade and exiting out his back, effectively rendering his right arm useless. Letting loose with a roar, Estevez moved his rifle to his left shoulder and again began firing. Caleb, seeing his friend get hit, tried moving up and over to Estevez, but was caught in a hail of arrows and rifle balls, keeping him where he was. Feeling impotent, Caleb went back to the grisly job of killing Comanches as it came into his carbine range. Jefferson stopped long enough to check the damage to his thigh, and finding it wasn't bad enough and no blood had started flowing, again reloaded his carbine and took up the defensive firing in the ravine. As the Comanches sensed they had scored some hits, they appeared to become more brazen in their approach and often came within 10 to 15 yards of the edge of the ravine before wheeling their mounts and dashing out of range again. But every rush brought them closer to the edge and better shot at the defenders. Caleb saw Estevez having a hard time working the lever on his big rifle and finally made the rush to his friend, telling him to take his daughter and get to the bottom of the ravine into the sparse trees populating the bank of the small stream. Taking Estevez's rifle, Caleb scurried back to his position and again started firing into the Comanches. It seemed to Caleb, however, that instead of thinning them out, the Comanches seemed to be getting larger in numbers, and the barrel of his carbine was getting almost red hot, as was Jefferson, who was also keeping up a deadly continuous fire. Switching to Estevez's rifle, Caleb shouldered the big full-size Winchester and took aim. The big rifle bucked into his shoulder and the Comanche ducked over to his side, but not before being caught in the trajectory of the big 44 caliber rifle ball, smashing his hip and unhorsing him to land flat on his skull before becoming silent on the prairie floor. Hearing the scream of horses, Jefferson turned back to see two of their mounts fallen and thrashing with arrows and rifle balls in their necks and bodies. Cursing silently, Jefferson renewed his fury at the Comanches, rapidly firing into them until his carbine was empty. Then drawing his Colt, he raised himself on a knee and started firing into the mass of screaming Comanches, following a rider the barrel of the pistol and squeezing when he had him in his sights. Caleb glanced over at Estevez only to find his friend with 2 arrows in his torso and his daughter laying on his chest heaving in heavy sobs. He scooted to Estevez and grabbed the girl, physically pulling her to him and back to his position when the rifle ball and arrow caught him simultaneously in the shoulder and side. Releasing the girl, Caleb let out a giant roar and joined Jefferson on the edge of the ravine, working Estevez's rifle and then his pistol like a banshee possessed. The Comanches, sensing the fight was almost over, slowed their attack and backed out of range. The hairy mouths had cost them dearly. Both Mukwuru and Pecos lay dead, killed in their first charge, lifeless near the front. Many more warriors lay scattered on the plains, having fallen victim to the ferocity of the Tejanos holed up in the ravine. Taking stock of their living and their dead, the Comanches gathered their remaining warriors, 15 in all, and began a slow march towards the ravine, slowly increasing their pace as they came and then breaking into a gallop, again screaming and yelling at the 2 remaining defenders. Both Caleb and Jefferson, now reduced to pistols and knives, knelt and held fast as the Comanches came at them. Once again, Jefferson and Caleb took aim as the Comanches got within pistol range. One more time, the 2 Colts barked into the afternoon, unseating 2 more warriors, but not before scoring a hit on Jefferson Greeley, an arrow striking deeply into his chest. Rebecca grabbed up Jefferson's big Richardson pistol and climbed to the edge of the ravine, pulling the hammer back on the big pistol. Rebecca fired into the warriors, the cake pushing her backwards. But as she's steady enough to cock and fire the pistol again, as a rifle ball took her just below her right eye, throwing her backwards into the stream below. Caleb fired his last shot and turned to find the remainder of his cartridges when he saw Estevez's daughter, curled in a fetal position, arrows protruding from her side and her chest. Fighting to the top, Caleb threw down the revolver and pulled his big Bowie knife from the sheath at his side. "Come on, you fucking Comanche bastards, come and get me," he screamed into the afternoon sun, mixing with gun smoke and dust. Bleeding from his shoulder wound and with an arrow sticking in his side, Caleb Stringfeld stood screaming in an animal scream, Bowie knife in hand, challenging the Comanches to finish it. Pulling up, the Comanches took one look at the savage face on Caleb and the ungodly screaming he was doing, daring them to finish the fight with nothing but his knife, and stop their advance. Gathering together, one lone figure rode from the group, stopping 15 feet from where Caleb Stringfeld stood. The Comanche sat looking at the screaming man in front of him. Not understanding this Tejas Tenhapu, he slowly swiped the flat edge of his hand over his breastplate. The warrior then turned and rode back to the group. Astonished at the sight, all turned and rode from the prairie, sure to come back to pick up their dead, but giving honor to a lone, hairy-mouthed warrior standing alone with nothing but a knife and a willingness to die. Caleb watched them go, tears streaming down his cheeks. He had been lucky. He had fought the fight and come out on the other side. Climbing back into the ravine, Caleb found Jefferson, Rebecca, Estevez, and Estevez's daughter, all dead. Hundreds of cartridge cases laying in the ravine and on the sides of the incline. Jefferson and Estevez had died willingly, protecting the 2 girls, fighting to the end for their preservation, but in finality, they were not able to overcome the odds. The 2 girls, in their own way, had shown courage far and beyond what Caleb had thought they might. The blonde girl, Rebecca, even picking up the fight when Jefferson fell. And in the end, all had shown courage, all had shown their God, they had earned their own gates to heaven. Looking at the stream, Caleb saw the 2 horses cut down in the fight, a third with an arrow shallowly embedded in his shoulder, and the mules untouched. Pulling the arrow from his own side, Caleb walked to the horse and gently pulled the arrow from his shoulder. the horse barely flinching. Caleb's wound, although not deep, would require some doctoring, but Caleb knew he first had to bury the dead, and with his injuries was going to be a chore. Trudging to the mules, Caleb pulled a spade off the packs, then dug around for medical supplies he knew all rangers carried in their pack animals, and found them at the bottom of one of the panniers. Sitting and sopping blood from his side, he finally stopped the flow and was able to bandage both his shoulder and side, taking intermittent drinks of the fiery Central Texas brew most rangers carried along with medicinal supplies. It wasn't until almost dark when he managed to get himself patched up and 4 shallow graves dug, tugging and pulling the bodies of his friends to their resting places before covering their remains with the sparse dirt he had pulled out of each grave. Working between long pools of bad liquor, he managed to get them deep enough that the animals would likely leave them be. Caleb finally sat back against his saddle and closed his eyes against the approaching blackness. Caleb wasn't sure if he was passing out or the darkness was creeping in at the end of the day. He was just grateful for the respite of having to continue to remain conscious any longer, and slowly succumbed to the hard-fought darkness.
And once again, that was Jim Christina reading an amazing chapter from his latest book, Jefferson's Chance. I am out of breath just having listened to that amazing chapter. It really was breathtaking. It was action-packed and really puts you in the heat of the moment. Make sure you go online and check out all of his other books. Follow the show note links for his books, his show, The Writer's Block, on latalkradio.com. We've got links for our sponsors, our friends, and the UCM Children's Literature Festival. Don't forget also to subscribe so that way each week you get a new author, a new book, and a new sample chapter. See you guys again real soon.